McAllister telling of Inverlochy, 2nd of February 1645. Prologue, the McAllister tightrope, Kintyre Argyll. In the McAllister world, the war is never just banners and proclamations. It's marriages, kin networks, and who will be blamed when the smoke clears. Hector of the Loop, chief, landholder, commissioner in the royal administration by your reckoning, does the thing chiefs do in civil wars. He tries to keep his people alive while the great lords play with whole regions like game boards. Margaret Campbell of Kilberry, Campbell by blood and McAllister by marriage, presses for caution until caution becomes a daily ritual. The household learns to live with uncertainty, as if it were weather. And then Mac Colla arrives like iron in a storm cloud, Irish hardened troops, clan fire, and a marriage thread that ties the battlefields back into Kintyre. Elizabeth McAllister and Alasdair Mac Colla, the kind of union that wins songs in one glen and earns punishments in another. The trap at Kilchummen. We strike first, or we die pinned. By 31st of January 1645, Montrose's force is worn down and short on supplies at Kilchummen, Fort Augustus, a bleak hinge point in the Great Glen. Historic Environment Scotland's battlefield record frames it simply. Montrose has about 2,000 men, while threats tighten from north and south. Portal.historicenvironment.scot, Argyll's covenanting force sits down at Inverlochy by the castle, believing distance and mountain will guard him. Montrose sees something else. If he tries to slip away, the net closes. If he attacks frontally, he's detected and bled. So the plan forms. The kind of plan that becomes legend because it's half insanity and half perfect logic. Don't go to Inverlochy. Arrive above it. The march. 36 miles in 36 hours. And the mountain remembers some harrow. The host moves with the discipline of hunger. Over rough ground, winter ground, ditches of frozen burn, knee-deep stretches, breath steaming into beards. Montrose and Mac Colla drive their men across a line the enemy believes is not a line at all. Multiple summaries describe the feat as roughly 30 miles, 36 miles in under 36 hours, the army making its way until, in the early hours of 2nd of February, they emerge on the slopes of Ben Nevis above Inverlochy. Wikipedia. And here your Sumherly echo belongs, because it's exactly the kind of moment the West tells in saga shape. Not banners first. Shadows. A line of still silhouettes where a sane man wouldn't post a scout. In the dark, the mountain seems to hold them the way a sea holds ships, silent, patient, inevitable. Down below, Argyll's camp reads the morning as ordinary until it isn't. The field. Inverlochy wakes to a hillside full of enemies. Argyll knows there's trouble in the district. Pickets have been rattled, rumors move, but not this. Not the whole royalist host perched above him. The shock isn't just surprise, it's a kind of disbelief. Sources repeat that Argyll thought Montrose should still be far north. Wikipedia, Montrose's men spent a freezing night out on Ben Nevis' side. Then, before dawn really commits, lines form. Irish companies and Highland levies. Clan blocks, officers tightening straps and praying their feet won't slide when the moment comes. The Highland charge, as a weapon, not a mood. The famed charge works because it's timed and purposeful. Close fast to deny muskets their reload rhythm, hit hinge points where units meet, where orders travel, break cohesion, then turn breaking into running. Pursue, because the deadliest part of a rout is the chase. It's the opposite of a polite battle. It's a decision forced at blade range. And at Inverlochy, the charge has the terrain's help. Downhill momentum, winter air, and an enemy still trying to believe what they're seeing. Seconds later, war cries. A cry goes up, not one voice, but a wall of sound that bounces off rock and castle and lochside, so it feels like the land itself has joined in. Then it hits. Not a clean, cinematic clash, more like a door kicked in so hard the frame shatters. Pikelines buckle, muskets fire too high or too late, orders fracture into panicked fragments. The Royalists pour through, and the battle becomes exactly what the Highland Charge is built to create. Shockpanic.org.uk. The McAllister thread inside the storm, tradition, not a muster roll. Here's where your Kintyre tradition drives its stakes into the story. In Records of Argyll, 1885, the Kintyre Traditions of Montrose's Wars preserves the boast that 3 men slew 60 with their own hands, with the tally given as George McAllister, 21, a Robertson, a blacksmith from Athol, 19, and Mac Colla, 20. Internet Archive. It's oral tradition language, heroic counting, memory sharpened into legend, but it tells you what Kintyre wanted remembered, that a McAllister name belonged inside the fiercest part of the press, shoulder to shoulder with Athol Ironman and Mac Colla's reputation. So in the saga version, you don't see Clan McAllister regiment neatly arrayed. You see McAllisters appearing where lines are thinnest, where the fight is hardest, where the story later needs a name to bear the weight of it. The route. The battlefield becomes a river. Once the covenanting line breaks, everything speeds up. Fear runs faster than boots. The lockside becomes a funnel. Men stumble, throw away weapons, try to vanish into winter grass and frozen ground. And the chase, in local memory, ends where a marker becomes a moral. Clachnan Kimbeolach, the stone of the Campbells. Tradition places this as the point where pursuers finally break off and turn back, a cairn later replacing an earlier stone, still remembered as a kind of grim punctuation mark on the flight. Colin S. MacDonald, this is your kicking rocks moment, where survivors stop running and start processing because the body can't sprint forever and the mind can't accept humiliation all at once. Aftermath. Bragging, counting, and the build that follows. The royalist victors gather in rough knots, breath steaming, hands shaking with cold and adrenaline, and immediately the old human need starts. Turn terror into story. A Robertson swears he saw a man knock a musket aside like it was a twig. A MacDonald enlarges the tale because that's what clan pride does, makes victory louder. Someone repeats the Kintyre yardstick, 60-21-19-20, because numbers feel like proof when memory is drowning in noise. Internet Archive. But the McAllister lens never lets the moment stay pure triumph, because Hector and Margaret, and anyone with ties in both directions, know what comes next. Argyle's humiliation becomes policy. Names become liabilities. Marriages become evidence. Not personally present becomes irrelevant if vengeance needs a target. And in later retellings, Argyle is imagined watching from Loch Linnhe, fleeing as the collapse becomes undeniable. Whether literal fact or tradition's picture of a man refusing to be seen losing, it captures the emotional truth the West carried forward. Inverlochy wasn't just defeat, it was a wound. Black anvil under a sky gone strange, winter clear, star hard, and above it a slow green curtain began to stir. The northern lights didn't dance so much as watch, as if the heavens had leaned in to see whether the old blood still remembered its work. On the slope, just off the main line of sight, shapes gathered. Not banners at first. Not even men, not in the way you measure men by breath and boots. They were Samherla echoes, quiet silhouettes, where the mountain's ribs fold into shadow, still as cairnstones, lined along ledges and hollows that any sane commander would call impassable. The kind of presence you feel before you see it, like a tide turning under a moon you haven't looked up to notice. Down below, the enemy camp lay in its morning confidence. Sentries stamped their feet, muskets cradled, officers planning for an attack that would come the normal way. On roads, through valleys, by drumbeat and warning. But this was Montrose's winter war, and Mac Colla's kind of war, the kind that arrives from where it shouldn't exist. A whisper ran through the royalist line, no trumpet, no flourish, just the soft, contagious certainty that now was the moment. Men checked grips, targes angled, steel kissed leather, the air tasted like iron and pine resin and cold. Then the mountain itself seemed to move. The Highland Charge, how it worked, and why it broke armies. It wasn't a mindless rush. The famed Highland Charge was a timed, brutal sequence designed to collapse an enemy's decision-making in seconds. Approach unseen or half-seen, terrain did the first killing, ridges, folds, and snow haze hiding mass and direction until the last heartbeat. A sudden sprint to erase musket advantage. Muskets and pikes want space and time. The charge denies both. The whole tactic is to cross the killing ground faster than the enemy can reload, faster than officers can redress their line. A shock volley at close range, often, when used, it's not a long firefight. It's a single slam of smoke meant to flinch men, blind ranks, and crack cohesion. Immediate impact with sword and tard, not dueling, but breaking. Targy up to catch steel or push a barrel aside, blade coming in tight, weight forward, shoulders driving. Target the hinge points. The charge aims for the enemy's joints, where units meet, where commands travel, where standards anchor courage. Split those, and the rest unravels on its own. Turn route into slaughter by pursuit. The real destruction comes after the line breaks, when fear outruns formation, and the battlefield becomes a funnel. Montrose's genius, and Mac Colla's ferocity, was getting men into the position where this sequence could happen as a surprise, downhill, in winter, with the enemy's attention pointed the wrong way. Seconds later, war cries. The first sound wasn't the clash, it was the war cry, raw, sudden, and everywhere at once, bouncing off rock and snow so it felt like the glen itself had found a voice. And then it hit. One moment the enemy saw only a dim slope and drifting frost. The next, their front was filled with charging bodies and screaming steel, men who seemed to have stepped out of the mountain's ribs. No one had time to ask how they got there. Time collapsed into noise. Shouted orders snapped in half, musket flash swallowed by panic, pikes turning too late. The royalist line didn't stop to admire the descent. It poured through. You wanted it as an echo of Somhairl, and that's exactly how it reads in saga form. As if the old Sea King's descendants had learned a new ocean, the white, steep ocean of the highlands, and were rowing it with their feet. MacDonald surged like a breaker, their officers barely needing to point. Instinct and insult did the steering. Robertson's hard men from Athol came in compact and punishing, like a smith's hammer face. No flourish, just impact. And in the telling, you're telling, the Kintyre-tinted tradition, McAllisters are there in the thick of it too. Not a separate army, but a name that keeps showing up where the melee is worst, where the enemy's line is trying not to become an open door. And once that door opens, everything becomes speed. The route, the battlefield becomes a river. As the enemy line buckled, it didn't retreat neatly. It spilled. Men ran because their neighbors ran. Officers tried to halt them and found they were shouting into a storm. The charge had done what it was designed to do. It didn't merely kill, it unmade the idea of standing still. Snow turned to churn. Smoke hung low. The screams of the wounded and the frenzy of the victors braided together until you couldn't separate them. Only feel the awful truth of it. The battle had turned into a chase. And the chase ended where tradition plants a nail in the earth. Clash nan came Beilach. At last, the fleeing men hit that place. Clach nan came Beilach, the stone of the Campbells in local memory. And that's where the route finally runs out of breath. Not because courage returns, but because legs fail, because the map itself says no further. Here the survivors slow, stumble, and, your phrase is perfect, begin to kick rocks as if the ground is at fault for what happened on it. Up behind them the royalists gather, chest heaving, steam rising from shoulders and muzzles and mouths. There's no tidy parade forming. It's a rough knot of victorious men, half laughing, half shaking, each trying to turn what they just lived through into a story that can fit inside the human mind. And already, the bragging begins. A Robertson claps another on the shoulder and swears he saw a man take a musket barrel aside like it was a twig. A MacDonald tells it bigger because that's what grudges do, they inflate. Someone repeats the old yardstick, the kind that turns into legend because it's too sharp to forget. Names, numbers, the idea of 3 men accounting for a heap of deaths. Whether it was exactly so or not almost doesn't matter in the moment. What matters is that the tale has teeth, and everyone present can taste them. And in the middle of that knot of exhausted triumph, under the last slow pulse of green light in the sky, the host feels it. Not just victory, but inheritance. As if the mountain had lent them its silence, the aurora had lent them its omen, and Somhairl's old shadow had leaned close enough to whisper, "You are still my kind of people, per mare, per terrace, by sea, by land, and tonight by snow and stone as well." Hector McAllister, 6th of the Loop, 14th Chief. The news reaches Hector not as a song, but as a weight, messengers with cracked lips and eyes too bright, repeating the same words like a charm, Ben Nevis, Inverlochy, the Campbells broken. They describe it the way men describe lightning. It happened too fast to count, and yet the burn marks are everywhere. Montrose's host, they say, came over the rough height in a 36-mile push and appeared above Inverlochy by the early hours of 2nd of February 1645, hungry and exhausted, and still struck like a hammer. Portal.historicenvironment.scot. Hector listens like a chief must. Not only hearing victory, but hearing the bill that always follows victory. A McAllister name, his people, spoken among those who stood in the red press and lived. Pride rises, sharp as salt. Then the other thought follows. Argyll will not forget, and behind that, Margaret's kin will blame, and they will look toward Kintyre. He stares out at his own winter fields and realizes the war has moved again. Now it's not just armies. It's consequences, rents, hostages, reprisals. 2. Margaret Campbell, of the Kilberry Campbells, wife of Hector. Margaret hears Inverlochy like a bad dream told by someone else, too vivid to be false, too awful to be safe. Her blood is Campbell, her house is McAllister. So the victory tastes double. Relief that Hector is not on that field, and dread at what the field means. She imagines the Campbell levies and lowland companies breaking, the line folding, men running until even the earth denies them. She thinks of Argyll, not as a banner, but as a man cornered by humiliation. She whispers prayers that sound like bargains. Let Hector keep his lands. Let the children live. Let this pass over us. And yet she knows the old truth of Argyll. Defeat does not end hatred, it refines it. From this day, the McAllister-Campbell marriage becomes not just a bridge, but a tightrope. 3. Alasdair Mac Colla, MacDonald. Mac Colla stands among the aftermath with the stillness of a wolf that has eaten. He is not romantic about it. He has done this before. Charge, break, slaughter, pursuit. And he knows a route isn't a miracle, it's a mechanism. He replays the key moments, the approach over broken ground, the enemy deploying too late, the downhill momentum, the way fear travels faster than orders. He watches men begin the old post-battle ritual, boasting, measuring, naming, because men need stories to make sense of what their hands just did. Some point south along the line of flight and talk of the place where the chase was finally broken off. Clach nan Caimbealach, the stone of the Campbells, the marker in tradition where pursuers stopped and turned back. Coast that shaped the world, Mac Colla lets them talk. He is already thinking past the glory, supplies, allies, the next forced march. Victory is a weapon. He intends to keep using it. 4. James Graham, 1st Marquess of Montrose. Title fix, he's the 1st Marquess and also the 5th Earl of Montrose, not a 5th Marquess. Encyclopedia Britannica. Montrose's eyes are on the whole board, even while the field is still steaming. He knows exactly what this victory does. It smashes the nearest threat before the net can tighten, before Seaforth in the north and Bailey Urry elsewhere can coordinate. And it proves again that his war is won by surprise, speed, and choosing the battlefield by refusing the obvious road, the same logic that carried his host to Torlandy overlooking Inverlochy after that brutal 36-mile, 36-hour push. Portal.historicenvironment.scot. Yet he isn't drunk on it. He feels how thin his campaign is. The cold, the hunger, the fragile loyalties. He watches Mac Colla's men, hard, fierce, indispensable, and also sees the political volatility circling them like crows. Montrose's triumph is real, but it is not secure. In his mind, the victory is already turning into the next move. 5. Archibald Campbell, 1st Marquess of Argyll. Argyll watches the ruin from the one place a commander watches when he cannot bear to be seen losing. From a galley on Loch Linney, removed from the crush, close enough to witness the collapse, far enough to survive it. Portal.historicenvironment.scot. He had left command to Duncan Campbell of Auchenbreck, and now he sees what happens when steel meets panic and a line breaks into running men. StuartSociety.org. In his chest, something hardens. He does not interpret Inverlochy as one battle. He interprets it as insult, danger, and a lesson. Never again allow Montrose to choose the terms. When it becomes clear the day is lost, he retreats, alive, humiliated, and furious. And that fury does what Campbell fury always does. It becomes policy. Hector McAllister, 6th of the Loop, 14th Chief. The news of Philiphaugh doesn't arrive like a victory message. There's no lift in it, no bragging. It comes ragged. Riders changing horses, voices lowering on the key details. Selkirk, the riverside flats of Philiphaugh. Missed. Surprise. Montrose's host shattered by Sir David Leslie on 13th of September, 1645. Wikipedia. Hector stands where chiefs stand after a distant disaster. By the hearth, by the doorway, turning rumors into risks. The first calculation is brutally simple. Arise. Retribution is moving again. The second is worse. This defeat will be used as a net to catch anyone even loosely tied to the royalist wave. He can almost feel the Committee of Estates' grip tightening. Philiphaugh means the war has pivoted south and east, but its consequences roll west too. The Isles and Kintyre won't be spared the accounting. 2. Margaret Campbell of Kilberry. Margaret hears the same facts and feels a different wound. Inverlochy had been the storm that proved Montrose could strike like fate. Philiphaugh is the cold morning that proves fate can be ambushed. They tell her Montrose's men were caught in thick mist, that the camp was hit so suddenly that what people remember most is the sound, gunfire breaking the quiet, and then the panic, then the running. The times her Campbell blood understands politics in the way a body understands fever. A decisive defeat doesn't end violence, it authorizes it. She thinks of how mercy is handled after a rout, how quickly it becomes punishment dressed as order, and she thinks, quietly, fiercely, of Hector, where he is, whether he's been named, whether someone will decide that damage control is the same thing as guilt. Number 3. Alasdair Mac Colla. Mac Colla is not on that field. His war has been pulling him west, toward old MacDonald ground and old Campbell enemies, the private war that keeps dragging him away from Montrose's lowland strategy. Wikipedia. But the catastrophe still reaches him, because Philiphaugh isn't only defeat, it's the type of aftermath. Word spreads that the Irish contingent with Montrose, those under Manus O'Cahan, were massacred after being promised quarter. Wikipedia. That detail lands on Mac Colla like a stone. He does not mourn delicately, he goes silent and hard. In his mind, the war's rules have been clarified again. Promises can be weapons. Mercy can be bait. Whatever dream Montrose had of turning victories into a settled royalist Scotland, Philiphaugh has punched a hole through it. Number 4. James Graham, 1st Marquess of Montrose. Title note, 1st Marquess, Montrose. After Philiphaugh, Montrose's world narrows to the essentials. What's lost, what can be saved, and how to keep moving when your campaign's magic has broken. He's been undone by what undid many great captains. Intelligence failure and surprise, an enemy using weather and timing better than he did. The times he hears too, the ugliest part, the slaughter after the rout. And it turns the defeat from tactical disaster into something darker. Not simply a battle lost, but a warning that the war has moved into a colder phase. Wikipedia. He rides with fewer men, fewer options, and more history pressing in. The myth of invincibility, born at Tippermuir, Aberdeen, Inverlochy, Aldern, Alford, Kilsyth, has ended in wet grass and mist. Wikipedia 5. Archibald Campbell, 1st Marquess of Argyll. Argyll doesn't need to be on the river flats to feel Philiphaugh like a personal reversal. For months he has watched Montrose humiliate Covenanting power, most painfully at Inverlochy, and then outrun every effort to pin him. Now comes the message that finally changes the shape of the board. Montrose decisively beaten at Philiphaugh, Covenanting control reasserting itself. Encyclopedia Britannica. If there's relief, it isn't soft. It's the grim relief of a statesman who has survived a predator. Philiphaugh means he can tighten policy again, reclaim initiative, and, most importantly, let others do the fighting while he steers the settlement. But beneath the strategy there's something older, a Campbell memory of danger. Because he knows what Montrose is like when cornered. Still quick, still clever, still capable of returning like a winter squall. Ledger of mercy. Intercut Mac Colla retreating, Leslie sorting, Margaret's dread, the rumor rider with the wrong Hector. The sea road turns to a trap. Dunaverty rock sits at Kintyre's edge like a clenched fist. Stone, salt, and the terrible clarity of geography. There is only so much peninsula, only so many roads, and when an army pushes south, it doesn't need genius. It only needs patience. Alasdair Mac Colla has never feared a fair fight. What he fears is the kind of moment where fighting stops being war and becomes accounting. He feels the net tightening behind him, the Covenanter advance, the rising certainty that surrender will be demanded, and the more poisonous certainty that surrender will not necessarily be respected. He looks at his men, tired, hungry, bitter, and he knows what this phase does to warriors. It turns them into fugitives, and fugitives into examples. Somewhere inland, he can almost sense where the decisions are being made, at tables and committees in neat handwriting that will later be read aloud as justification. 2. Leslie arrives. Not the storm. The cleanup. David Leslie's forces come down Kintyre, not like raiders, but like a machine. Disciplined, systematic, cold with purpose. It isn't the musket that becomes terrifying here. It's the voice of authority saying, open quote, lay down arms, come out, you will be dealt with. Close quote, because dealt with can mean anything. In this war, it has learned to mean the worst. Leslie accepts surrender, then moves onward, and the peninsula becomes a corridor of decisions. The soldiers, who in other contexts would be ordinary men, become the hands of post-battle justice, the kind that doesn't need to hate you. It only needs to process you. And when violence returns after surrender, when the killings continue beyond what a battlefield demands, people in the West learn the true terror. Mercy can be revoked. Not because of a sudden rage, because of a decision. Margaret, the house runs on deliberate normality, until it can't. At Kilberry in the Looplands, Margaret keeps doing what she always does. She makes the house behave as if the world is stable. Bread, candles, linen. But the war is in the air now. Every neighbor's eyes are slightly wrong, every conversation clipped, every visitor treated like they might be carrying a sentence. She hears the names first. Lochhead, Loch Kilkerran, then Dunaverty. The way people say them is what breaks her composure. Not loud, not dramatic. Just careful, as if speaking too boldly might summon men with paperwork. She has lived long enough inside Campbell political weather to recognize the pattern. First, the army arrives. Then the surrender. Then the punishments, justified after the fact. And she can't find Hector. Not because he has vanished into cowardice, because chiefs are always pulled into the in-between places. Negotiation, pledges, assurances, messages carried under cloak. The kind of work that saves lives when it works, and kills reputations if it fails. She wants him home. She wants him not named. She wants him to remain small enough to be overlooked. She prays. But in war, prayer feels like sending letters to an address you no longer trust. The rumor rider. The wrong Hector becomes the right fear. The rider arrives half mud, half wind. He doesn't sit. He doesn't even properly greet, as if manners might be a luxury that costs time, and time costs lives. His words spill out blunt and trembling. A Hector McAllister, hanged with 2 sons at Winnie Hill. Margaret doesn't ask which Hector. She can't. Because her mind performs the cruelest act in the world. It makes the most frightening interpretation feel like certainty. Hector. 2 sons. Near Kilkerran, Kintyre. Her breath stops. Her hands go cold. She hears herself say quietly, like someone reading a sentence, no. It isn't denial, more like a refusal to let language do what it's trying to do, make the horror real. She sees it instantly. Her household emptied, her marriage reduced to a warning, her sons never growing old. The writer adds one more detail, almost as an afterthought. And they said his wife was a Campbell kinswoman. That is the nail. A mirror of herself. For a moment, Margaret cannot heard anything but the blood roaring in her ears. Because now the rumor doesn't sound like random brutality. It sounds like symbolic punishment, as if the war has selected her exact life as a lesson to the peninsula. Even marriage won't save you. She does what proud women do when grief is too large. She becomes still. And underneath the stillness is fury, not at a single man, but at the entire logic of this war. At Mac Colla's retreat, bringing fire back down Kintyre, at Leslie turning control into cleansing, at Argyll's influence, whether direct or indirect, at paper seals and assurances and promises that evaporate at rope's height. V. McCullough. The moment the war leaves no door open somewhere south, nearer the rock and the sea, Mac Colla receives the kind of news that turns a commander's stomach without softening him. Men surrendered. Men were killed anyway. The details vary by mouth, but the meaning doesn't. Terms are not terms if the victor doesn't honor them. His fists clench, not with theatrical rage, but with a cold internal recalibration. If mercy is unreliable, then negotiation becomes a trap. And if negotiation becomes a trap, then every camp becomes a potential gallows. He thinks of Elizabeth, what her name now means in the mouths of his enemies. He thinks of the McAllister lands, how easily association becomes guilt. He thinks, briefly, almost unwillingly, of Hector of the Loop, the chief with Campbell ties, pressured to be reasonable in a war that punishes reason. Then he forces the thought away because it weakens the only thing he can still use: forward motion. But the West is shrinking. Roads end. The sea is the same sea that once made Kintyre powerful. Now it is simply a boundary. Thus, Leslie's sorting. When a battle becomes a courtroom, This is the part people remember not as a battle, but as a process. Men are separated, names are demanded, origins become dangerous. Irish names, followers of Mac Colla, those who harbored, those who aided, those whose kin aided. It's bureaucratic violence, the kind that feels clean to the people performing it because it is written down and therefore, in their mind, justified. And the hanging at Knocknamert's Winnie Hill, whether remembered in tradition or whispered by families who would rather not say the name at all, fits here like the final punctuation mark of the operation. Not war, but warning. Specific. Margaret's private verdict. That night in her house, with the doors barred, Margaret sits as if her body is present, but her mind is standing somewhere else. On a hill she has not seen, under a rope she has not witnessed, listening to a crowd she can only imagine. Her prayers become jagged, not pious, not gentle. They become bargaining again. Let it be a mistake. Let it be another Hector. Let the writer be wrong. And then, because she is a Campbell enough to know what truth often looks like, she whispers the sentence that is harder than grief. Even if it is not him, it is still us. Because in a war like this, a rumor isn't just information. A rumor is the shape your fear takes, training you for what may yet come. Outside, the wind crosses Kintyre like a messenger that never gets tired. Inside, Margaret Campbell of Kilberry understands what Dunaverty really is. Not simply a place, a principle. A reminder that after the fighting, the victors do not always offer peace. Sometimes they offer a ledger, and they balance it with blood. Dunaverty, the terror of post-battle justice. In the West, battles don't end when the shouting stops. They end later, when the administrators arrive with rope, papers, and witnesses who suddenly remember exactly what you said 2 years ago. Dunaverty and Dunaverty are where that truth hardens into a local superstition. Never trust the words quarter or mercy until you are home, behind your own door. The campaign rolls over Kintyre like a storm tide. Not one great wave, but a sequence. Pressure, surrender, pursuit, then the most frightening phase. The sorting. Men are sifted into categories by people who were not there when choices were made. Rebel, Irish, accessory, harborer, kin. And the West learns the political version of drowning. You can die without ever being struck, simply by being attached to the wrong name. In Kilberry and the Looplands, Margaret Campbell does not need a messenger to explain what this means. She understands the shape of the new danger immediately. Before, the war could be navigated by distance. If you didn't show up, maybe you weren't counted. Now, the war is navigated by records and retaliation. If your name exists, they can use it. And because Elizabeth's marriage has tied McAllister blood to Mac Colla's line, the family feels the trap as a physical thing, like a net you can't see until it tightens across the chest. It is in this atmosphere, where mercy is suspect and survival feels like negotiation with the sea, that the Montrose episode belongs. The Montrose episode. McNeil's Hector bargain at the edge of ruin, tense, dialogue heavy, a chapter scene. They meet where men meet when they don't want witnesses. Not in a hall, but in the in-between. A borrowed room, a sheltered corner, an outbuilding with a door that can be closed quickly. A candle burns low. The air smells of damp wool and ink. Pierre, or M. de Monterol, French diplomat, smooth as a sealed letter, sits with his hands folded as though he is praying to paperwork. He is not of the clans, and that makes him dangerous in a different way. He can observe without belonging. He can carry words across borders. Across from him sit two chiefs who should not be in the same room if this were a simpler Scotland. Neil Ogmac Neil, whose lineage carries C-rating stories like salt in the blood. Hector McAllister of the Loop, whose lineage carries the West's awkward truth. Survival often depends on marrying your enemy's kin. Their faces are hard with the strain of the last years. Too many musters, too many friends turned into threats. Too many nights trying to decide whether to stand or slip away. Monterol's French-accented Scots, or his interpreter's careful mouth, breaks the silence first. "Gentlemen," he says softly, "you have asked to speak, of assurances." Neil Og gives a humorless smile. Assurances. A fine word. Sounds like a blanket. Feels like a shroud. Hector doesn't smile. He watches the diplomat the way a hunted man watches water depth. "We aren't here to admire words, monsieur." Monterol inclines his head. "Then speak plainly." Neil Og leans back, and the chair creaks like an accusation. Plainly, the wind has changed. It is blowing hard against our roofs. Hector's gaze flicks to Nialog, an unspoken agreement. No boasting, no clan theater, only the ugly math. But Nialog cannot help himself completely. He tips his chin at Hector, as if to scrape a little humor out of the misery. "So, Hector of the Loop," he says, "I hear you're married to a no-good, crooked-jawed Campbell woman." The insult lands like a spark in a wet room, small, bright, and quickly smothered by reality. Hector's eyes narrow. "At least I married a woman who can read the weather. I hear your father was a weak, thieving pirate." Nialog bares his teeth in something that might be a grin in another life. "A pirate, yes. Weak, no. He stole from those who could afford the loss." Hector's voice is flat. "And now the ones who can afford the loss have decided to make us pay it." Montrose watches them as if he is taking notes on how men keep themselves from screaming. "So," he says, "this is not simply talk. You wish to send a message to General Leslie." Hector exhales. "Slow. Yes." Nialog's fingers drum lightly on the table. "We will not dress it. We will not sing it. We will not pretend it is honorable." He looks at Hector. Hector does not look away. Hector speaks like a man signing something he hates. "We are prepared to abandon Mac Colla and our followers if our lives and property are assured." The words sit in the room like a blade laid down. No one touches it. Everyone feels it. Montero's eyebrows lift a fraction. "You understand what you are asking?" Hector's jaw tightens. "I understand what I am losing." Nialog glances toward the candle as if he might find a better answer in the flame. "We have watched what happens after battles now," he says. "It isn't the fighting that terrifies a man. It's what comes after, the tidying." Hector's voice goes lower. "Post-battle justice." Montrose repeats the phrase carefully. "Justice." Hector's laugh is small and bitter. A Scottish word that means whoever has the soldiers may call itself righteous. There is a pause, and in it you can feel the presence of women who are not in the room but rule the men's choices like gravity. Hector checked it without flourish, without seeking sympathy. "My wife has Campbell blood. She has been praying for a path out of this. My daughter has tied our name to Mac Colla. I am being cut in half by my own household." Nialog's voice softens, not kindly, but honestly. "And will you betray your son-in-law?" Hector stares at the tabletop, as if it is a map. "I have to betray my son-in-law," he says, "not just to save my marriage." He stops, then corrects himself, because he will not lie even now. "Not just to keep my children breathing. I have to betray him to save my head." Montrose folds his hands tighter. "And you think General Leslie will accept such a proposal?" Nialog shrugs. "We think he might accept it if he believes we can deliver followers. Or if Argyll wishes it." At the name Argyll, the room cools. It is one thing to speak of the Covenanter army, it is another to speak of Argyll as a person, because Argyll is not merely force. Argyll is memory with an administrative seal. Hector's eyes lift. "Argyll may promise anything," he says, "and there's heat in it now, quiet but real. But Leslie is a soldier, not a Campbell. He may not care for Campbell promises." Montrose nods slightly, as if this is the most important sentence said so far. "So you fear your offer will be treated as insincere?" Nialog smiles again, thin. "We fear it will be treated as convenient to ignore." Hector leans forward. "We are not asking for love, we are asking for terms." Montrose studies them, two chiefs both reduced by the war to bargaining like merchants, except the goods are men and the price is survival. "I will carry your words," Montrose says at last. "But understand, once carried, they can be used against you as well." Hector nods once. "Everything can be used against us now." Nialog rises first. He cannot resist one last jab, because it is how he keeps fear from showing on his face. "To think," he says, "a McNeil and a McAllister in the same room, trying to buy our lives with promises." Hector stands too. "To think," he answers, "the West per mare per terras, reduced to per signature, per mercy." At the door, Nialog pauses. "Hector." "Yes." Nialog's voice loses its sharpness. If this fails, Hector fills in the rest without words. They both know what failure looks like now. It looks like being sorted after Dunaverty, like names spoken aloud at a rope, like wives receiving rumors that feel like death even when they aren't true. It looks like post-battle justice. Hector answers anyway. "If this fails," he says, "then we do what chiefs have always done. We try to leave enough living behind that the clan can still call itself a clan." and they step out into the wet air where history is waiting, patient as the sea. Kilberry kept the household running on deliberate normality, bread measured, candles rationed, linen folded, because if her hands stayed busy, her mind couldn't gallop off the cliff edge. But the war had learned the roads to Kintyre. In the spring of 1647, the air itself felt like it carried hoofbeats. Neighbors spoke in half-sentences. Men on errands came back with their faces set, as if they'd seen smoke on the horizon and didn't want to give it a name. Margaret heard the same place names repeated with the same dread. Lochhead, Loch Kilkerran, Dunaverty, spoken like prayers that had gone sour. She did not know exactly where Hector was. Not her Hector, Hector McAllister, sixth of the loop, her husband, her tightrope walk between Campbell blood and McAllister duty. She had pushed him, again and again, to stay out of the worst of it. Don't be a piece on their board. Don't be a trophy. Don't be a lesson. She knew what politics looked like in wartime. It was not debate. It was death dressed in paper seals. Hector had tried. Damage control, cautious words, careful silences. He hadn't marched at Inverlochy, hadn't stood on Ben Nevis under Aurora and Omen. But Margaret understood the cruel arithmetic of clan vengeance. You didn't have to swing the sword to be punished for the swing. If your kin fought in a man's host, if your name was said with pride in a victory, then later your name could be said with rage in a courtroom or at a gallows. So when the news finally reached Kintyre, it didn't come as a clean report. It came as the kind of rumor that arrives before truth. Muddy, breathless, repeated too quickly to question. A man had been hanged. A Hector McAllister. And 2 of his sons. They said it happened at Knocknamerce, Winnie Hill, near Kilkerran, in the same brutal window when the Covenanting pressure rolled down the peninsula. Surrender accepted at Lochhead, Loch Kilkerran by May 31st, Dunaverty taken within days, and killings done by June 6, the exact span where tradition plants the hanging like a nail. No long trial, no gentleness, just rope and silence afterward. Margaret's knees went weak, but she did not fall. Her mind did what a mind does when it's trying to survive. It grabbed the first certainty it could hold. Hector. 2 sons. Winnie Hill. She didn't think Glenlusa. She didn't reach for the careful distinction the historians would one day argue over. She only heard Hector McAllister and saw her own hearth emptying, saw her own children's faces as if the rope was already above them. She walked to the doorway where she could see the long sweep of fields and the gray edge of the sea beyond, and she pressed her palm flat against the wood as if the doorframe could keep the world from moving. Her throat tightened with a fury that felt almost holy. Because she had tried. She had pressured him to bend, to bargain, to be small enough to be ignored. She had swallowed pride, Campbell pride and McAllister pride alike, and urged peace with men who would never call it peace unless it came with submission. She had done the hard, humiliating work of safety, and now the reward, so it seemed, was the oldest punishment in Scotland, a chief's name mocked by a rope. And then the bitterest detail reached her, the one that twisted the knife rather than pulling it free, that the hanged Hector's wife was said to be a Campbell kinswoman too, a mirror of herself. It made the rumor feel fated, as if her bloodline had built the trap and stepped into it at the same time. In that moment, she didn't know whether to curse Leslie's men, curse Mac Colla's doomed retreat that drew the storm into Kintyre, or curse the whole cruel logic that made families pay for alliances they could barely control. She went back inside, shut the door, and sat down without ceremony. There were prayers to say. She said them, because it was what you did when you had nothing else left to do. But they came out flat, like words spoken underwater. And beneath every petition was the same unspoken thought, raw and relentless. If they can hang a Hector McAllister and 2 sons here in Kintyre, in the shadow of Kilkerran, then what is any promise worth? What is any damage control worth? Outside, the wind ran over the peninsula like a runner carrying more messages. Inside, Margaret Campbell of Kilberry held herself very still, not yet knowing the truth, that the hanged man was Hector of Glenlusa, not her husband, only knowing that in times like these, even when the name proves to be someone else's, the fear is never wasted. The retribution still exists. The noose is still real. And she realized with a cold clarity that felt like waking into winter. Even if Hector lives through this week, the war has already found their household. It is standing in the doorway with mud on its boots, using familiar names.